This is the idea, all right, for WWJD, the whole series, is that we're called to do what Jesus did. And our problem is that we all too often want to try to be perfect, and we want to, but our version of perfection ends up emphasizing morality. And morality is not the perfect thing to chase, because morality changes with society. It changes with what culture thinks is good and bad. And there are some things that never change. That's true. Like we've always thought murder is wrong. But we also make exceptions, right? For when maybe it's okay. And those exceptions change with the times. Like there are different times when just war, what's allowed in war, there's all of these different things. Morality moves. But holiness doesn't, because holiness is being like Jesus. So we're called to holiness, not morality. And if you live in the right place at the right time, holiness will make you an immoral person in your culture. Like that's not true for us today, but we live in a world, we live in a culture that's founded on Judeo-Christian values. And so our culture's moving away from that. And then so there are some values that you have to hold to that make you seem like a bad person now. But at the same time, 50 years ago, they made you seem like a good person. And so morality moves and shifts. Jesus doesn't. Jesus is who he is. He is who he'll always be. He is who he always has been. And so we're called to be like Jesus. And the best way to figure out how to be like Jesus is to unpack the Great Commission, which is Matthew 28, 18 through 20. All power in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'll be with you to the end of the age. And so what we've done is we've taken it apart week by week. And the first one is all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. What does that even mean? And what does it mean for us? Right? Because that's an important thing. When he starts with that statement, it implies that for us, that means something. That means that he's giving us the authority. We're his followers. He's giving us the authority he's been given. And we see that in the second chapter of Acts, where the Holy Spirit falls, and all of a sudden the disciples are doing things that Jesus did. Right? And so what does that mean for us? What that means for us is we have access to minister in that power, to walk in that power, to be those kinds of people. And it's not for selfish gain. It's not for pride. It's not for any of that. It's for his glory. It's to preach the gospel. The next week was make disciples, and how can I be someone who tells people about Jesus? How can I preach? And in all honesty, like we're all called to that. The Great Commission was given to all the disciples that were left after the crucifixion and the resurrection, right? And so how if it was given to them, it's given to us. And so we're all called to preach the gospel and make disciples. But what does that look like? How can I be that person? And then the next week, or last week, we talked about baptism and practically baptism being the rite of passage into the body of believers. Sacramentally, like in the sacrament, it is the inward or the outward proclamation of an inward work of grace, right? That's what it is. And it's very important, and it's something that we do as a ritual. But at the same time, practically what it means is when someone's baptized, they're invited into the family, right? And then this week, it's teach them to obey my commands. This is the problem we got lots of problems with this one. The first one is this: we like to try to teach people before they're even a part of the family. We want to get people, if you've been in church at all, you've heard the whole sermon. We want them to get cleaned up before they can come in, the whole deal. But we do still expect people to act right. It's less now than it used to be, but you got to understand, if somebody doesn't know Jesus, they're not going to, you can't expect people who don't believe what you believe to believe what you believe. And so, and if they just got saved and now they've been baptized, okay, cool. They're still not going to know what you know because they didn't believe what you believed. And so what does that even look like? And then on top of that, our version of teaching is not the same version as Jesus's version of teaching. It's just not the same. When we think of teaching, we think of a classroom and rows and a chalkboard and a person standing up in front teaching. And that's just not how Jesus taught. He did preach. But when he was walking with his disciples, he was giving them object lessons and stories and examples. That's what the parables were. When we see Peter in Matthew chapter 16 proclaim Jesus as the Messiah, for the first time. You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus had taken them to the city of Caesarea Philippi, and there's tons of pagan temples in this city. And so Jesus took them there for this moment. Right? So that, Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes, God showed you that, and you're the rock. Your name's now Peter. God showed you that, you're the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And the gates of hell will not withstand it. Well, behind him are all these pagan temples, and he points, basically, I'm assuming, because he's here for a reason, right? The gates of hell will not withstand it. Like, you will march into the space of the enemy and you will not be defeated. That's the way he taught. He took them to places to show them things. He told them stories that explained things in ways that they could understand. Like, it's just not the same. He walked with them every day. The teaching that we see from Jesus is way less like a Bible study where we sit in circles and watch a video of somebody who's done this Bible study and then talk about it, or where you sit and hear a theological lesson, and way more like parenting, walking through life together, trying to relate things to people, trying to help them understand. Like, it's way more involved. And so what he gives us, we're going to be in John chapter 13. What he gives us in this is, to my mind, like the perfect example of how he taught. So this is John chapter 13. It's just before the cross. And we're going to be verses 1 through 17. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will. No, Peter protested, you will never, ever wash my feet. Jesus replied, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. Simon Peter exclaimed, then wash my hands and my head as well, Lord, not just my feet. Jesus replied, a person who is bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you. For Jesus knew who would betray him, and that's what he meant when he said not all of you are clean. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right because that's what I am. Since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. So Jesus gives them an example here of what he wants them to do, how he wants them to act. They don't, you got to understand, the disciples don't really get it yet though. After this, in the Garden of Gethsemane, what we see happen is they come to arrest Jesus, and Peter, he draws a sword and he ends up cutting a guy's ear off. Like there's some level of not understanding that Jesus came to sacrifice himself on behalf of all of us, on behalf of them. There's still this. I mean, you kind of get it, right? When I look back on my life and I think about how I wish or how I wanted things, and then how God showed up and how he made things happen, it's never in the way I expected. It's never, we pray for things and then we find that God fulfills that request, that prayer, but it's never the way you want it. It never works out the way you thought it would. And Well, that's kind of the deal that they're in now, because what they think is going to happen is they think that they're following a leader who's going to free Israel and who's going to make Israel great again. You're going to free them from Roman rule. And he's going to free them from Roman rule, and he's going to take it back to when it was the times of King David. Or they have other theories. Like, they weren't 100% sure what the Messiah would be. Their theories on the Messiah seem to look a lot like our theories on the end times. Like, we got lots of them, and some of them don't make any sense, and some of them do. They're not sure, but they're pretty convinced that he ain't going to die. They're pretty convinced he's not going to die on a cross. They're pretty convinced they're going to follow him until they die. And they do follow him until they die, but he does die on a cross and all that. So he's showing them, to be honest, he's setting up the sacrifice to come, because he has to show them that he's sacrificing for them before he makes the ultimate sacrifice, and they start putting all the pieces together. Wait a minute, that's how we're supposed to act. That's who we're supposed to be. On top of that, you're dealing with people who walked a lot, didn't wear socks, and they had sandals. This is not the job that the master, that the teacher is supposed to do. Like, when it comes to washing the feet, that was the worst job. That like the servant who had to wash the feet was the guy who got in trouble that day. You know what I mean? Like, that's the guy who showed up 15 minutes late for work. Not Jesus. Because it's just, your feet are gross, right? Probably. Yeah, I think all feet are gross. Your feet are probably gross. Now imagine just sweating and getting mud all over them. Imagine not having a sewer system and walking down the road. Nasty. And that's the job Jesus decides to do, right? But he's teaching them something. So at the end of the day, what we're going to do is how do I position myself as a teacher? How do I position myself as an individual to teach in the way that Jesus taught? How do I do that? How do I do that so that I can do it the way he did it? The first thing that we see here in verse 3, Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. Jesus knew that he knew what he was about to do. He knew what that meant for the level of authority he had. And it says that, then verse 4, it says, so he got up from the table. He knew that he had the authority given to him by the Father. He knew that he was the one who was going to save the world from their sins. He knew that he was going to redeem these disciples. So he got up and did the gross job. His whole reason for washing their feet is because he knew who he was. And so the first thing is this: be the shepherd, not the king. I have this shirt that says King Jesus, and I like it, and he is King Jesus, but the way he presents himself in this moment is as the shepherd, as the one who has to walk before and has to go before and make sure that it's safe, the one who has to go before and do all the dirty work, the one that has to go get the sheep out of the thicket, the one who has to clean the sheep, the one that has to shear the sheep, the one that has to do all of the dirty jobs. That's the first thing, is because he knew he was king, he acted like the shepherd. And we can't put ourselves into a place where we talk down to people. We can't put ourselves, if God allows you to be in a place which he does, and he will, to be in a place where you can walk alongside somebody on their faith journey. When he puts you in that spot, you can't talk down to him. You got to walk with them, and you got to do the stuff you don't want to do. Humility is required. Why? I could give you a million reasons, but let's just start with the simple one, because Jesus did it. So when I was, when I was 27, 28, I ended up being the executive pastor of New Life and played. My dad was a pastor, and that's kind of how that happened. We had a lot of fluctuation on the team, and so I was next guy up because he could trust me. Like, at least he knew how I talked, and he knew that I wouldn't tell him anything that wasn't true, you know? And so that was me. I stepped into that role. So like 27, 28 years old, I'm essentially the executive pastor of a big church. And, you know, to be honest with you, I had always dreamed of kind of doing that job, kind of in that church. And it's not great when you catch your dreams at 27. And I started to get prideful. I started to get a big head, started to get a little silly. And you gotta understand, I grew up in that church. Like, I have mopped every floor in that church. When the septic tank clogged up one time, this is gross, but whatever. I went in there and plunged the drain to get the floor to drain. Like I've done all of that stuff, right? And so I got into this job and I'm like, I don't have to do that anymore. Which is stupid. It's not really the way that it works, right? And so I got into that job and I was like, I don't have to do it. And I would work my way around. I would work my way around having to do things I didn't like to do. And it was because I thought I had achieved something that was above and beyond that. And so then you fast forward a couple years, I end up over here and I start doing this. And there was a lot of humbling experiences in between. And God had kind of, broken me because I was an idiot. And I ended up over here. And 3 summers in a row, I don't know if you know this, but like in church world, the finances get tight in the summer because everybody goes on vacation. And when people aren't here, they don't typically give. And like, it's all good. Like, I'm not whining or anything, but things get tight in the summer. Like, that just is what it is. And so like 3 summers in a row, every Saturday I came in and cleaned and did all the stuff that I avoided doing 5 years prior, you know? Because you don't get to be the king. Like, you don't get to be the one who tells everybody else what to do and expect that they're just gonna do it. You have to be the shepherd. You have to prepare the place for your sheep. That was one of the best lessons I ever had. I scrubbed every toilet in this place. I scrubbed it with tiny little brushes because there's one toilet that the crud won't come off of. I've mopped all the floors. It's not that I'm proud of it. It's just that I'm glad I got to. That's what, if we want to teach well, like, we got to get to that place. Like, it's not that we're proud of doing the gross things. It's that we're glad we get the opportunity to serve the people God's given us. The next thing, verses 4-7. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will." We're to be the servant, not the instructor. So we need to be the shepherd, not the king. You don't get to just be in charge of everything, but also, like, we need to be the servant, not the instructor. That means we need to get dirty and show them what it is that they need to learn. We need to get dirty and be a part of the learning process. Like, we need to be in the middle of it. One of the things in my life that I'm so thankful for is we had the opportunity in the last couple of years for my wife to start homeschooling my kids. Right? And you got to understand, like, no judgment, by the way. And also, don't judge me back. How about that? Right? Don't act like I'm going to have the weird kids and don't feel like I'm judging you. We'll be good. So I don't let my kids play Dungeons and Dragons, but that's like a just in case thing. I don't want them to end up doing that when they're 40. But anyway, at the end of the day, the reason that I'm thankful for it is because she gets down on their level. She works with them. She gets her hands dirty with them. She's showing them, not just telling them. And like, look, in a classroom setting, like I'm not criticizing, but like in a classroom setting, when you got 30 kids, like all you can do is hope that they stay at their desk and instruct them. And you do it the best that you can. And there are lots of teachers that go to this church that do that and they do it well. But I'm super pumped that my kids get one-on-one attention. And that's what Jesus is doing here. Jesus knew Peter was gonna act like that. He knew Peter was gonna be like, no, you can't. Like he even like, let's just unpack this for a second. Like even if Jesus didn't have the foreknowledge of God, he still would have known Peter was going to act like that. It's in Peter's character. No, don't do that. No. He knew that was going to be a point of contention, and he had a plan for how he was going to deal with it. And it wasn't to tell Peter to shut up. He just looked at him and he said, "You don't understand now, but just let me do this. Because if you let me do this, you'll understand later." And like, that's the big deal, because Jesus ends up going to the cross, and this is an act of service. And when they put all the pieces together, you find that Peter actually understands what Jesus did, because in the last interaction in John chapter 21, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, when you're when you're older, you will be led to the place essentially where you'll die. Which is foreshadowing the fact that Peter is going to die in the same way Jesus died for the sake of the gospel. And Peter has all of these other experiences in his past with Jesus that he can look and go, okay, I get that. But to be the servant, not the instructor, we don't get to just shout people down. The next one, verses 8 and 9, "No," Peter protested, "you will never ever wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and feet as well, or wash my hands and head as well, not just my feet." And Jesus in verse 10 says this, "A person who is bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean, and you disciples are clean, but not all of you." What Jesus does here is he speaks to Peter's identity, not his behavior. Peter is acting out. Peter's not listening. Peter's not doing what he's not letting Jesus wash his feet. And then this is the wildest thing about this story. Peter says, "Don't wash my feet." No, never. And then Jesus is like, "No, I have to." And then Peter goes from no, never to, "Well, then give me a bath, bro." Right? It's just like, "No, you could never do it." And he's like, "No, actually, give me a bath." Like, it doesn't make any sense what Peter's doing. He's just emotional in this moment. He's just like, okay, well then if my feet have to be washed, then wash me all over. Like, if this is important to you, then go all the way. And Jesus is like, whoa. Like, no, you have to understand, I'm not saying that you're unclean. I'm saying that I clean you. And there's a difference. I'm not saying that you need to be completely like hauled over. You believe in me, you trust in me, you love me, but you still need to be clean. You still need my forgiveness. You still need my grace. And Jesus speaks to Peter's identity. He speaks to who Peter is. He doesn't tell him, "Stop acting like that." He just says, "Hey, you don't need this, because this is who you are. You're mine. Not all of you are mine, because Judas is about to go do dumb things. But you are." He speaks to Peter's identity, not his behavior. The other day, one of my, actually, man, I think this is a huge place. I think this is a huge place, a huge learning place. I think this is something where we can give people so much value. So I'll give you two. One's not really a story. It's just something I faintly remember, and then a story. So when I was younger, when I first got my license, I was a complete idiot, and I got like 7 tickets in 18 months. Like, just, only one of them ended up on my record because I went to court every time and worked it out. I don't know. God was with me or the devil was with me. I'm not sure which, but I got out of most of them. And there was one that I was going, I think it was this one. I was going pretty fast. I was going over 100 miles an hour. I was an idiot. You should never do that if you're just learning to drive. And I got pulled over. It was this whole thing. In the aftermath of that, my dad, I remember, he looked at me and he said, you know, that's my last name. You have my last name. And that when I got that name, it wasn't worth a whole lot. And I made it worth something. Don't screw it up. It was speaking to who I am and whose I am. And this week I had a similar example, but it's not nearly as good because my kids are really little, so they don't understand it. So I figure I'm just gonna have to say it like 20 times, but probably more, like 20,000 times. But one of my girls was here for the homeschool tutorial and kind of lost her mind a little bit and decided to have an attitude because she didn't want to go where she needed to go. And I happened to be at home with our youngest because she was sick. And so what happened was her aunt had to pick her up. And she started mouthing off at her aunt. And then one of the teachers had to try to help her aunt. And she started mouthing off at the teacher. And it was this whole thing. And we got home and we're sitting and eating dinner. And it had been like a really good 20 minutes that everybody's home, right? And then Amanda tells me this story. And I just sit my fork down and I'm sitting there. And she got in immediate trouble. But I turned and I looked at my oldest and I said, hey, do you understand why that happened? And she's like, no. I said, because when you go somewhere, you are mine. You represent me. You are a Hilson, and that means something. We're not allowed to act that way. When we speak to somebody's identity, we don't have to beat them down with how they screwed up. And Jesus doesn't beat Peter down here. He just tells him, hey, you're better. Actually, you're better than you think you are. You're better than you think you are, but you just need this and you need to learn this lesson. He speaks to identity, not behavior. The last one, verse 12. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash others' feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. Last one is this: be the example, not the excuse. So unpack this situation here. Jesus is about to head to the cross. And for us, that's a glorious thing. But for them, they don't understand that when it happens, it's going to be crushing. Because Jesus is going to be arrested as a criminal and killed in the way that is reserved for the worst criminals. Their leader, their teacher, the one that they followed, the one that they've bought completely into, is going to be arrested. First of all, that would be a destabilizing moment. Secondly, he's now going to be killed in a way that's reserved for murderers and thieves and horrible people. And that's what is going to happen to them. And so for them, the next logical step, like Peter gets a lot of gets trashed on a good bit for denying Jesus, but you got to unpack that. Like in that moment, you'd probably do the same thing, because it's like, man, I know he taught all this stuff. I know he did all these things, but I also know what I'm seeing with my own eyes. And if everybody thinks that he's wrong, and I think he's right, maybe I'm wrong. Turns out Peter wasn't wrong, but like the doubt, the fear, the insecurity in that moment that would be to come, right? And here's the thing, Jesus preps them. This happens just before the cross. Jesus preps them for that moment. And by saying this, he says, I've given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. He serves them in an extravagant way, in a way that he's not supposed to do, in a way that nobody else would have done. You notice none of the disciples got up and said, no, how about this? I'll wash their feet. Like none of the disciples offered to do it for him. And so he serves them in this extravagant, over-the-top way. And he sets an example for how they're to serve. And then when he raises again, they start to unpack it like, this is what has happened. This is how this has gone. Okay, I get it. But if Jesus doesn't stand as the example here, what happens after the resurrection? Like what happens otherwise? Like how do they go differently? Jesus does this all throughout his life. Like God set this up in such a way that Jesus would be the example and not the excuse. He very easily could have been in the excuse because of the way that he was going to die, but the whole thing is just so crazy. He was born in a manger. That's a feeding trough for donkeys. The Savior of the world's born in a manger. He lived in like a rural backwater, Nazareth. Like it wasn't like a big town. He rode into town before the crucifixion on a donkey. He was a carpenter. All of his followers were basically college dropout types. His disciples. The way he died could have been an excuse, but because he spent his whole time teaching and living, preparing them for sacrifice, preparing them for what was to come, because he thought about it. He served as the example, because he was involved in it, because he put himself forward to be the first to do the dirty jobs, because he put himself forward to be the first to do the things that nobody else wanted. He was the example that they looked to, not the excuse they used to get out of it. In our world today, like if you're a parent, you're called to be the example for your kids, right? You're called to be the one who leads them through life. You're called to be the one who takes them to, who shows them how to live. But how often do you hear in somebody's story them use their parents as the excuse for their bad behavior now? Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. But I do think that a lot of times those things happen because we don't understand how to teach well. We'd rather tell somebody what to do than show them. We'd rather demand that people act differently than show them what it takes to act right. Like if we're gonna do what Jesus did, and we're gonna operate as a church the way Jesus calls us to, that means when you interact with people that God's put in your way to lead, when you interact with people that God's put in your path to teach, that means a whole lot of doing things that maybe you don't like to do. It means that we view love through the lens of self-sacrifice. That means we view grace as something that we give and God gives. We teach them to obey his commands by acting the way he acted in front of them and telling them why we're doing it. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for sending Jesus as the examples. Thank you for sending Jesus as the one that we can follow and that we can serve. And Lord, I just pray that each one of us would be humble enough to follow his example. I pray that each one of us would be ready to do what it is that you call us to do. No matter what it costs, no matter what it takes. Lord, walk with us so that we have the intelligence and the grace and the direction to walk with you. We love you and we thank you. Amen.